Okay, we're going to hear from just 4 of our network action teams to get some updates on where they are and what their goals and priorities and plans are for the coming year. So unfortunately, this slide got a little bit too light at the bottom, and it's hard to read some of the other network action teams. These are all listed in the back of our annual progress report, and several of them are ongoing, but the 4 that we asked to give some remarks today are 4 that would love to have more input from a wider section of the network. These are all very active teams, one just getting activated, the others have been around for a little while. So I'm going to give each of these speakers 5 or 7 minutes to let you know a little bit about, hopefully mostly looking forward, what they're going to be working on. And then we will have a little bit of time for Q&A through that same link. And we're going to start with not Neil Lunderville, who had to step out, but actually Kelly Lucci, who steps in whenever we ask her to, which is why we gave her that award earlier today. So let's welcome Kelly Lucci to tell us a little bit about the Weatherization at Scale Network Action Team.
Yeah, so I am playing Neil Lunderville today. I know I'm a pale substitute, but I have been involved in this group for quite a while, and very excited to be part of the progress. So I'm going to do my best to fill in and provide just a general update on how we got where we are and where we are. So Weatherization at Scale started 3 years ago as a result of a pitch at an EAN summit, and there's a bold goal named to weatherize 120,000 homes in Vermont by 2030. The core premise undergirding this goal is that weatherization needs long-term, stable funding, predictable funding, in order to meet Vermont climate requirements. We need to provide that type of consistency to the market. We haven't been able to do that to this point. So the team from the beginning was really trying to think about long-term, what's it going to take to meet these goals. A couple other things that I think is important to just highlight around why we're so focused on weatherization. We really recognize that it's a critical first step to whole home decarbonization, and really thinking about comprehensively an energy use picture for a household. And it's not going to be possible to meet the goals that the state has set forward if we don't think comprehensively. Workforce is a continuing challenge as it relates to this work. It can be complicated to do the work well. You have different, groups of contractors who do different aspects of a project. But our general drumbeat from the beginning has if we can identify stable, long-term funding, we're going to help create and build that robust market to make the success possible. And we can do it across a whole range of programs in this space. VGS has a weatherization program in their customer area, Efficiency Vermont. We've got the low-income weatherization agencies, so really bringing all of those folks together. All right. So in classic Neil fashion, we have a timeline and a map outlining the progress. I would say he's framed this up pretty accurately here. We've made some good, steady progress toward the goal. Just some highlights to name. The identification of on-bill financing as a key solution path, and the evolution of that into the RAP pilot that we've been so pleased to partner with VHFA on and bring them into the fold. The intersection of housing and energy, I think, is a really big opportunity and a great statement about the value of the type of network that EAN's allowed us to build in this space. Ensuring weatherization is an eligible funding activity under Act 18. The Affordable Heat Act, and really just the regular knowledge sharing and updates that the meetings have been able to afford us as we kind of continue to gather this group. So looking ahead to the coming year, we're going to continue efforts to identify those long-term funding mechanisms. We're so appreciative of the steps policymakers have taken to leverage, allow us to leverage federal dollars and get us through the next couple of years. We're going to be thinking about what is it going to take to extend that on into the future? What does that look like? What's the particular package of services and incentives that's really going to be compelling and help drive progress for low and moderate income folks? And we'll be looking also at the intersection with helping support flood recovery as well. There's been some really great work done across all of the utilities to help pull services together and try to make a solution path more accessible to Vermont flood survivors. And we're going to continue working closely with the other EAN network action teams, points of intersection around the climate workforce for sure, on opportunities to build a market, and again, looking at affordability, particularly for renters, and how do we get property owners engaged in these services as well. And there's obviously going to be continued policy and regulatory conversation that'll be important to follow here. So last slide, just want to highlight the range of partners who've been involved in this effort over the last 3 years. Incredible expertise, incredible knowledge about what it takes to implement programs, and about how to navigate some really complex policy questions. I've been so appreciative of the opportunity to work with these organizations more closely in trying to crack this nut. And the last thing I want to highlight is how essential Cara has been to this team. Really the glue that holds the effort together, keeps us on track, continues to help us articulate solid goals, milestones, and hold us accountable for moving forward. So thank you, Cara.
Oh, perfect. All right. Hello, everyone. I'm Dylan Giambattista. This network team was established with the knowledge that not a lot of us have done this. And in order to meet our greenhouse gas reduction goals, we really need this essential ingredient of people. Now, there's been some analyses that the state has done. Every year there's this clean energy jobs report that was referenced earlier that is conducted. It shows we have about 18,000 workers. Well, this network team came together with the goal of establishing how many more might fit into those categories, because there's no federal definition in the labor statistics and information systems that we use as a state and at the federal level for this area of workers. And we made a determination with some information that we gathered up that maybe there's closer to just under 19,000 workers. But when I look at the trajectory of those curves that we need to do to reduce emissions, to install these energy services in Vermonters' homes and businesses, we're going to need a lot of workers. So we know that we're falling short of that workforce need. We talk about it all the time in Vermont. So what have we done? We've done some pretty cool things. We've had a number of initiatives underway. And in 2023, we've broken off into working groups to try to focus into some bite-sized pieces. Because this is rather daunting when you are told that you don't have enough people to do something that you have to do. It gets a little tricky. So we focused on employee-centered issues. We've conducted focus groups with workers or potential workers. We have also compiled that feedback that we pulled together into a report, which is available. It's really great. Compliments to Cara and others who worked on that. It was a lot of work. We've conducted an employer-centric work group, and we've hosted a webinar on retention practices and developed and deployed surveys to employers. We're continuing to hone in on what we can do to support the needs of employers in Vermont and share some of those recommendations. We've also had an innovative funding working group, which during the legislative session, some of us who are members of the network team, but not representing EAN, volunteered to go down to Montpelier to point out some potential investments the state could make that would help in this area. Things such as a public awareness initiative, which is a key need that we've identified through our research. And also we successfully, some of us worked to advocate for funding for a program that the Vermont Sustainable Jobs Fund is putting together to help with business coaching for businesses that maybe currently are in the energy business but are not necessarily installing clean energy solutions. this might serve as a means to help coach them. So we've had some successes. We're also working on some developments with partners. We are really excited. One of the things that we know we need, there's an initiative run by folks who are involved with the Chamber of Commerce, Vermont Talent Pipeline Management, which has done a lot of mapping in sectors to help employers get connected to training opportunities, potential employees, and so forth. And we have actually worked with our partners at Efficiency Vermont, who we are very excited to learn are actually going to be dedicating funding for a position for this purpose coming up, so that we'll be able to map thermal workforce needs in this space, which is going to be really critical to meeting our climate goals. The other thing that we've started to do is some outreach. We've talked with plenty of post-secondary education and secondary education leaders, but we're really focusing in now on career and technical education, which serves as a network in the state where some really relevant skills are being developed for this purpose. So we've had some good accomplishments over the past couple of years. So what are we looking at next? We really want to think about the initiatives that we can develop that will help addressing climate workforce. We've got some key initiatives underway, but this question of how do we increase public awareness, these are not just jobs that are focused on helping reduce emissions. They're actually really good jobs available with skill sets that contribute to a vibrant state. So trying to figure out how we connect with folks about what those opportunities are, what is a job in the climate workforce, and bringing it to a level that's understandable and digestible, that's work that will continue. We certainly want to support the business coaching initiative that I referenced that the Vermont Sustainable Jobs Fund and others are taking the lead on. So that's something we're going to be looking at. This talent pipeline management process for the thermal sector, I work for a gas utility. We got to figure out some way to help employees understand what the opportunities are and connect them with the employers, because employers need workers. So this is an opportunity. And finally, these opportunities with career and technical education. There's going to be a lot more. And the next opportunity where you could join the conversation is October 6th. We have a coalition meeting, 10 a.m. to noon. It's going to be in Winooski. And if you want those details, they're on the website. You can hit me up. You can hit Cara up, and we'll get that for you. So that is it on climate workforce.
So thermal energy networks can include geothermal, but they are more than that. They use ground source or water source heat pumps, and they have pipes underground, which makes them highly resilient. But they also use waste heat, so heat from wastewater, heat that's venting out of buildings, probably like this one. Have you noticed the background ventilation noise? Right. So there's a lot of heat that we already have around us and under our feet that a thermal energy network captures and moves and can also store. So our team has been focused on thermal energy networks. And as a representative of this team, I'm working off of notes because I want to make sure that I represent what the team wanted to say. And I also want to give a shout out to Morgan Hood and Sam Lash, who are here on our team, but also point out that we've consulted with many people in this room and look forward to talking with many more of you in the year to come. So we're really all on the same team. So thermal energy networks are working and are underway in other states. We have a bill in Vermont that supports them. Thermal energy network bills are now law in New York, Colorado, Minnesota, Massachusetts, and there are more bills coming in New York and Massachusetts, in addition to new bills in Illinois and Washington. There are 20 gas utilities that are now in a coalition nationally that are looking at how we can do this. And Morgan Hood of VGS is one of the coordinators who got that group together. VGS also has a Department of Energy grant to do a network geothermal project in Heinsberg, and that is one out of 11 national grants, not low interest loans, but actual grant money to do a geothermal network, and that's happening in Vermont. So the question is not just what's happening out there and nationally, but how we can do this here in Vermont, how we can put this solution on the table and implement it. First, before I tell you what we've been up to do that, I was asked to talk a little bit extra about why this matters across Vermont. So we already know that thermal energy networks, because of the way they're implemented in other places, make a lot of sense in Vermont for our town centers. and for denser areas. And we're going for denser areas with new housing and infill and that kind of thing. Also for new construction. And if you live in South Burlington like I do, you know what I'm talking about, that there's a lot of that going on. But also for affordable housing, which is much needed. And the IRA incentives that we've heard about already today make this, according to the experts, the tax experts, a no-brainer. So thermal energy networks can also help our entire state. Although they're not going to work everywhere, they can benefit all of us because they lower electric demand and shave peaks significantly. So I have a lot more information up here on some handouts if you want to know more, but just for these purposes today, I want to talk about two things. Number one is the Falcon curve. As we know, winter and summer peaks drive up costs, raise questions about reliability and electric build-out. That's part of the discussion. As we replace more fossil fuel heating with electric, we'll increase those winter peaks, and as we need to cool our buildings more, we'll also create higher summer peaks. So the Falcon curve describes these increases from electrifying, heating, and adding more cooling. I want to make sure everybody hears me and our team say that air source heat pumps are really important in Vermont, especially in our more rural communities. We need to put as many of those in as many buildings as possible and do all the weatherization we possibly can. At the same time, because they're so highly efficient, ground source heat pumps are an important part of our portfolio of solutions, and they need to be on the table. So this graph, the Falcon curve, models how energy peaks are influenced by different technologies. The highest peak one is obviously electric resistance heating. The lowest one is networked geothermal and thermal energy networks. Among electrification strategies, these ground source heat pumps perform best at minimizing peak demand. And in colder climates where we're going to have higher peaks, they're especially important to keep costs lower and make sure that we have the electricity we need where we need it for those air source heat pumps. The other thing to know is that the Dunsky report from Canada, looked at the impacts of ground source heat pumps, which is this central technology in a thermal energy network, looked at the impact of those across Canada and found that while they cost more to install up front, the peak load and electric consumption benefits offset this initial cost. And for all of Canada, they could cut $357 billion from electrification. Now, that's Canada, and we're Vermont. So what does that look like here? Mainly right now that this Dunsky report and the Falcon curve are a prime motivator for our team and hopefully for all of us in exploring using ground source heat pumps that use existing heat in Vermont. So this is an invitation to electric utilities and communities and others to talk about this and figure out how we can do this together. So on to what the Network Action Team has been doing. We formed last year to accelerate neighborhood scale decarbonization in Vermont. In other words, community thermal networks, by doing three main things. Building a coalition to create a strategy for how we do this, where it makes sense, and exploring multiple ownership models to make thermal energy networks available to more Vermonters as co-ops, as municipal systems, as utility-owned systems. What are the possibilities? And also to create the tools and resources needed to support projects. So our team includes Vermonters with expertise in regional planning and town energy committees, and those are really important members of the team because they give us important reality checks and on-the-ground knowledge. We also have experts in engineering and policy. We have representatives from Efficiency Vermont, VIC, VITA, Vermont Bond Bank, VGS, and of course, Energy Action Network. So our progress so far is that we're focused right now on creating an online resource that can also be a printable PDF to help more Vermont communities consider and assess the value of having a thermal energy network in their town. We're calling it How to Develop a Thermal Energy Network, and it's intended as a practical guide to support planning and strategic resource-efficient decarbonization for communities. So the components are identifying thermal energy resources. What do they look like? Like a large grocery store, a wastewater treatment plant, a hotel, and how to build a network connecting those resources with customers that can share heating and cooling. We're also offering recommendations on site selection and project development, and especially understanding those ownership models I mentioned and related financing opportunities, because how you access the Inflation Reduction Act depends on who owns and operates it. The audience for this is people like we have in this room today, municipal leaders, community members, regional planners, so local people, but also businesses, developers, and existing utilities that can do this across the state. So for us, for next steps, once we have this resource available, which should be in a month or two, we're hoping, we're going to start having monthly calls that are open to anyone who wants to join the conversation. And some team members we're hoping will be involved in specific projects developed in Vermont towns. There are a number of towns that are already really looking closely at this or forming working groups to develop a project. So by the next EAN summit, next year when we're back here, we hope to have focused on three main areas: education, so sharing the resource that we've created, clarifying and communicating about what the Inflation Reduction Act means in order to do these kinds of projects, and also to learn from the VGS Department of Energy project in Heinsberg that I mentioned earlier, because we need to be able to see these working, to see them going into Vermont communities. Also, project development. We are going to work to include thermal energy networks in state, regional, and local planning. So I have a lot of ideas that I collected from earlier today of people that I want to talk to about making sure that we're not just talking solar, wind, etc., but also we are always adding thermal energy network to the list of our solutions. And of course, our team is focused on getting at least one project in the works somewhere in Vermont. And related to tomorrow's conversation, when our network action teams can get together, we also want to focus with others here on workforce development. Because as we train people to install heat pumps, we also need them to be trained to install ground source or water source heat pumps, not just the air source heat pumps. We can do both. So that's the report from our network action team. Thanks a lot.
So what is tenant weatherization? Sorry about that. Thank you very much. 30% of Vermonters rent their homes. The EAN initiative, Weatherization at Scale, while highly successful and critically important in upgrading Vermont's aging housing stock to limit energy consumption, did not address the weatherization needs for renters. Vermonters are disproportionately lower income, living in older housing, and are more likely to be marginalized. The majority of renters pay for their own utility bills and do not have the autonomy, and usually don't have the resources or incentives to weatherize the homes that they live in. This creates a split incentive between landlords and renters. Landlords have little incentive to modernize, as they won't personally see savings through utility bills, and renters have little incentive to pay significant sums to modernize homes they do not own and likely don't have the power to do so. This is an issue that has been analysed and addressed in many countries around the world and several communities across the United States. Through our project, we aim to learn from our global and national neighbours, to research and develop our own systems to encourage landlords to weatherise their housing stock. We will utilise the fantastic work already done by the Weatherization at Scale group and the incentives that they have created, and interweave these projects with tenant-specific programs to create a weatherization plan that will address the needs of the 30% of Vermonters who rent. In the early stages of conducting this research, we have also identified a significant housing data gap we have in Vermont. So part of our work is to come up with solutions to address this informational gap, both for the Tenant Weatherization Initiative and to make sure Vermont becomes better prepared for climate disasters like we saw this summer and no doubt will continue to see as the climate catastrophe intensifies. At the EAN conference last year, you also voted to support our pitch to work on tenant weatherization. So what have we been up to since then? Working closely with Middlebury College, we completed a research project on weatherization and tenant protection. We did a deep dive on the data we could source regarding Vermont housing analyzed the tenant weatherization programs around the world and within the United States, and created a tiered list of program recommendations to address tenant weatherization needs in Vermont. The folks I worked with put together a fantastic report, and I would love to share it with anyone who is interested in receiving that. We also created a detailed tenant survey to distribute around the state and had in-depth one-on-ones with responders to supplement our research. Hello? Okay. To supplement our research with lived experience from renters in Vermont. Finally, as Cara has already mentioned, we have just set up our EAN work group to bring in stakeholders into this conversation and to begin our work through this research. We'll be starting our work group on the 4th of October and hope this group will signal the next step in our project. Joining this project will be Julia Tomas from St. Johnsbury Community Hub, Laura Caven-Bailey from the Vermont Council on Rural Development, Paul Zabriskie from Capstone, and Chris Burns from the Burlington Electric Company. While this group is small, we aim to expand and create subcommittees dedicated to various areas of the project. Spots are still open, so if you want to be part of this initial steering committee group and would like to get involved, please come and see me, and I'll let you know all the details of our meeting next week. Thank you very much.
One of the questions is, what are the key workforce challenges for employers that you've surveyed, but also could be that you've heard from? Do you want to take that, Dylan?
Well, we have heard primarily the themes that you hear in the news. I mean, it's lack of housing, lack of childcare, pay. So, these are familiar impediments, and, Vermonters, folks who come to the state, folks who reside here, have to weigh the benefits and some of the challenges that come with it. And so easing those barriers, we heard some feedback early on from folks representing the labor community, the organized labor community, and these were the themes that came up. And, there's a truth to the fact that you got to pay well to be competitive in this environment. But at the same time, as it relates to the employers, I will just say that, they sort of acknowledge challenges that I don't want to call them anecdotal, but they identify issues of maybe a lack of skill sets. Maybe it's an issue of tenure where you cannot retain an employee. You get them up to a trained position and then they move on to another opportunity. It's a very competitive work environment. So they're familiar themes, and our focus has been on, well, think about what the employers need, what the strategies are that will contribute to retention. I think that the model that the Vermont Sustainable Jobs Fund is exploring in terms of helping existing employers think about what they can do and how it can be easier for the employer and benefit the employees is a really good one. At the same time, on the employee side of the conversation, it's really identifying the strategies that, what are folks looking for? What do they need? And I think that, part of this is, it might not even be tangible. I don't know that we can really fix it, but it's helping folks understand that these are meaningful jobs. They contribute to something very large in that they would help us avert a climate catastrophe. On the other hand, though, they're really practical, good jobs that are available, and with a skill set that you can develop. These are technical jobs with technical proficiencies. You can go to work every day, contribute meaningfully, create something, build something, and help Vermonters live a better life. So, I mean, there's some tangible and intangibles that we're working on, but I hope that gives a little snapshot. And I would welcome comments from others.
Yeah, Debbie. We've been looking at workforce for thermal energy networks because we specifically need drillers for the geothermal component, and we need installers, of course, of heat pumps, and we need engineers. So we've been talking to Vermont Technical College as well. And there's a national conversation going on in the drilling community about Gen Z and what they need and expect, what they need in terms of training about how do you talk to a boss. The people at Bradford Tech Center in Vermont who teach HVAC told us they have kids who don't understand the kind of words you would use with a boss versus with a peer. And so their basic skills, I don't know if people here have friends who are teachers who've been through COVID with kids who have been isolated, and we've got a whole generation of people who need to learn about how to be with other people, communicate, be part of a team, that kind of thing. I have some friends who are elementary school teachers. It's really striking. So the drilling community is working on getting drillers, can you imagine, to employ soft skills when they work with younger people to try to attract them, train them, and retain them. So I just thought I'd offer that.
Does anyone else want to say anything about the workforce? I'll say just really briefly, because I had the opportunity to compile a lot of the information that came out of different focus groups from different communities we did around the state. And that was hearing from the potential workers and the sorts of things that they're looking for. So they're looking for a lot more flexibility. They're looking for more support. If we really want to diversify our workforce in these areas, which I think is the only opportunity we have to have enough workers to do this work, we need to be looking at what do younger folks want in the workplace? What do parents with young children need in order to be able to have these jobs? So there's two different conversations that intermingle, I think, in terms of what the employers and what the employees need and how we help them to mesh with one another. Okay, there's a couple of questions, Debbie, here for you about geothermal. So one is, why did the PUC turn down VGS's geothermal network proposal? And do we need legislation to fix this? And then the other, why have so few businesses or communities adopted geothermal to date? And yeah.
Okay, so I don't know that I'm the person to answer the PUC VGS question. Might ask Dylan to jump in if you'd like after. But I can talk about a little bit about what I'm hearing about why there's been so little geothermal. Obviously, the people who have large houses and big budgets can afford geothermal for their homes. I think there are two major things. When people hear geothermal, we're talking about like why it wouldn't work in a town or why a school wouldn't adopt geothermal instead of a wood chip burner. It's two things. So one is people think geothermal and they think geothermal of 10 or maybe 15, 20 years ago, and there have been some installations that didn't work very well. The technology is simple, it's low tech, but there have been improvements in the industry that mean that this is very low maintenance, very reliable infrastructure. So when people think geothermal, they're often thinking in the past. Also the upfront costs, right? I bet everybody in this room could have guessed that one. So the IRA is a game changer for this. With 30% off, those tax incentives that we heard earlier are available right away. Those are not only available right away, but also as direct or elective pay, which means a lot to municipalities, nonprofits, and businesses. So there is a lot about the IRA that makes geothermal a really, not just a good idea, but actually make total sense and can actually recoup costs over time in a way that they can be not just affordable for customers, but the upfront costs can be secured. So I think those are two main considerations. Do you want to talk PUC?
I can mention it real quick. With regard to the question around the geothermal proposal, that's now the third from the top. So I work for VGS. Historically, we were formed as a gas utility, and increasingly over the years we've become an energy services company in that we install equipment in customers' homes, we do comprehensive weatherization work, things of that nature. And recently we've been exploring alternative energy solutions that would be considered clean energy that might provide a solution into the future for different customers at different scales. Perhaps it's residential, it might be commercial, industrial, large businesses. Amongst these, we've looked at geothermal as one possible technology. We're a fully regulated utility, which makes us a little unique from other folks who have explored geothermal in the state. And so as a regulated utility, we need to work with our regulators. I know there's folks from the Public Service Department or maybe some folks here who have worked for the PUC. I'm not sure if there's active staff, but in that relationship, we put forward ideas and the regulators review them. So there have been proposals on the table, but it's a continuous process. We're excited to work on it. We do think that geothermal or network thermal systems are going to play a large part in Vermont's energy future. So a thermal energy network is one of the ones that we're interested in. So, when things don't move forward, back to the drawing board you go, and that's what's been going on.
I'm going to direct the next couple questions to Tom and Kelly because they're both talking about weatherization. So there's a couple questions here. What are some examples of programs in other places that bridge the incentive gap for landlords and tenants? And has the tenant weatherization group considered regulatory sticks to get recalcitrant landlords to move on this issue? So probably you might each have a little bit to say on those two questions.
Yeah, I can pretty much answer both those questions with one answer, actually. So, two places that the team in Middlebury did look at. One was a bit more locally in Boulder, Colorado, and the other one was actually my home country in England. A bit stronger of a regulatory stick is how they've been doing it in England. In order to be a landlord in England, like in many other professions, you do have to have a landlord license. And in order to get your landlord license, you need to prove when you are a landlord that you are actually holding up your end of the deal. As part of this is obviously a landlord registry or rental registry, something we don't currently have in Vermont. But attached to that is also the understanding that your house will be livable for your tenants, and so it will be up to a certain code, which means it will be up to a certain energy efficiency standard. If you are found to be not following these regulations, then you can, and then you do get your landlord license taken away, and you cannot no longer rent out those homes because you've been shown to be a neglectful landlord. I don't know if that would fly in Vermont, if I'm honest with you. I've certainly been in the housing game long enough to know that there's a lot of pushback when it comes to home ownership and property rights. One thing they're doing in Colorado, though, I think may be a bit more palatable. And so this is happening in Boulder, and it was a law that got implemented a few years back now. And basically, they do have a rental registry in the city, and landlords are required to weatherize their homes within an 8-year period, and in that 8-year period they are given access to a number of different grants and initiatives, very much like the weatherization at scale initiatives that are going on right now. But if they fail to weatherize their apartments in those 8 years, then the landlord is responsible for the utility bill. That takes away that split incentive. It means that the landlord has it, it's definitely within their interest to weatherize it, because otherwise they're going to start paying the utility bills. And those that do neglect to weatherize their apartments are going to see why weatherization is very important when those 8 years are up. Now, this law got implemented, I can't tell you the exact date, but it's been less than 8 years, so we've not actually seen any landlords kind of come up against this yet, but we should be seeing it in the next few years, and I'd be very interested to see what happens. But I certainly think that could be a model we should go forward with in Vermont, but we're also looking at other places as well.
I don't have a lot to add to that. I did just want to note that I think interesting to watch developments in Burlington. I understand from Burlington Electric and VGS that implementation of some of the local requirements that have just come in place has really created a lot of demand for weatherization in the city, which is exciting to see among property owners. And I just wanted to note too, 3E Thermal does really great work for income qualified multifamily buildings in the state. We're really pleased to be able to partner with them, and are working to put additional incentives on the table to support this type of activity, leveraging some of the federal dollars coming through. So, hoping the stars begin to align a little bit more here. We can pair that with direct engagement and outreach, and begin to see some more progress.
Thank you. I don't know if anyone has, this is more of a technical question. Is there such a thing as a split heat pump that are air to air when exterior temps are greater than 40 degrees Fahrenheit and ground source for lower temps? My guess is no, because the ground source portion is so expensive to put in, but.
I would just say a little bit about it.
Yeah.
Yeah, so clearly I am not an engineer, but I am in the room when engineers are talking about ground source heat pumps and air source heat pumps sometimes, and there are innovations out there, new technology that blend air source, ground source, air to water, air to air, and all of that stuff. So Water Furnace, Climate Master, Enotech, these are the companies, the manufacturers in the US who are really focused on that, and I hope to be able to share more about that later, but it's possible there are people in this room who know more than I do. But yes, people want to be able to put air source heat pumps in buildings and then later be able to connect them to a geothermal system or thermal energy network. So that's coming, if not already here.
Great. I did not know that you knew the answer to that. Okay, I'm going to take the moderator's privilege of asking a question that's not up there. And my question to each of you to close this out is, why might other people in this room want to join in with you on the network action team to get some things done? And maybe we'll just start with Debbie and pass the microphone down the line.
Okay, thank you. That's a great question. I would say because thermal energy networks are an exciting solution that we can implement here in Vermont. So I would just say personally, as a climate activist, I'm often in the position of fighting things and trying to oppose things. And this is about collaborating with people across all kinds of interest groups to implement something that works for many people in many places, but that also requires input from many different people. It appeals to people who are conservative and concerned about not spending too much money on things and are really focused on economic development. It also really appeals to people who are focused on dramatically slashing emissions. So these systems can start at 60% of cutting emissions, and up to many of them cut 80% of emissions. So this is really going to make a difference where we can implement in Vermont. Plus we have some great people on the team and we have fun. Thanks.
That's a pretty good pitch. For climate workforce, I mean, this is a workforce development discussion being had by folks with energy experience, with policy experience, and what we're trying to do is reach out to a broader network, and we really need more voices at the table. If you look at the pieces of legislation that have been enacted into law in Vermont over the last 15, 20 years, they set goals, they become requirements, and then it's up to us to figure out how it's going to fit together. So workforce is the essential ingredient. If you look at recent climate legislation that we need to do it, we need the hands, we need the people, and we got to figure out how to connect these systems, be it primary education, secondary education, post-secondary education, career and technical centers, training centers, all sorts of folks, employers, employees. So if you like collaboration, you like trying to pull people together, you want to do something that's essential, this is a great network team to join. So we welcome you. And October 6th, we're meeting in Winooski, 10 a.m., so you are welcome.
Tough acts to follow. Thanks, guys. So why you should join the Tenant Weatherization network group. Housing is currently one of Vermont's largest issues. I know we're all in this room climate people, and it is something that we at Rights and Democracy are also fighting for, but this is a real immediate need in Vermont. So this is going to be a project that is going to address issues among the rental population in Vermont, and the impacts will be felt very quickly. You will see the fruits of your labor happen very quickly. It is also a wide-ranging project. It doesn't just have the tenant weatherization policies that we'll be trying to look through. We'll also be having to implement other things like a rental registry as well, and working towards how we get that fixed, which doesn't just address climate issues, although it does really help us with climate readiness, because as we saw during the floodings this summer, we didn't know who rented what where, and as a result, so many of our most impoverished communities ended up getting a lot harder hit than maybe they would have done, or are not recovering as quickly as they should do. But you are also going to be implementing a groundbreaking, hopefully statewide policy that could be the leading policy that the rest of the United States could follow. So it's pretty big stuff. If you're into the kind of big projects, this is definitely for you. But honestly, we just would love to speak to you, even if you don't want to be part of the team. There is so much expertise in this room today, and I think every single one of you got something to contribute to this project. So please come talk to me if you're interested.
So closing out the big question here, I guess I would say weatherization is at the intersection of so many of the things I think we all care about. It's going to be critical if we're going to meet climate goals. I think we're all here because we like to get tough stuff done. So good opportunity to join with a good group that crosses a number of sectors and to really try to tackle a hard challenge that I think we've actually made some incredible progress on over the last 3 years, which is really exciting to see.
So much. Can we give a warm round of appreciation to these folks?